Hi, I am Adrienne Quinn Martin. I'm your host for this week's episode of Blue Talk Texas, where we discuss Texas politics with Democratic candidates from across the state. Joining us today is Uduak Nkanga, candidate for House District 113, Kevin Morris, candidate House District 67, and Chuck Cruz, candidate House District 128. Thank you all for joining me today. I'm excited to have you here. Since Election Day is Tuesday, we'll be discussing a lot about voting. We'll jump into our discussion at the end. We'll take a moment to go over each of your individual campaigns. All of our candidates today are running for Texas State House. Uduak, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. You're running in District 113, and that's North Texas, correct?
Yes, ma'am, like Northeast.
Okay. Last year, House Democrats broke quorum to stop Republican voter suppression bills. Unfortunately, parts of the bills ended up passing, along with other extremist bills. We've all heard recently about vote-by-mail applications being rejected. Do you think that these voter suppression efforts could end up hurting overall voter turnout?
I do think voter suppression efforts is affecting voter turnout. When we look at the statistics, according to Cost of Voting Index, that was compiled by political scientists at Northern Illinois University, Jacksonville University, and Wuhan University. Texas is the hardest state in the United States to vote in. We lack the comfort and the convenience of voting in the state of Texas. For example, we still have 30-day pre-registration deadlines. They've reduced polling locations by about like 50%, I believe. And they also refuse to extend voting hours, especially when you look at early voting. When you looked at early voting within the first week, voting hours were closed by 5 p.m., as you know, which was an inconvenience to a lot of working families because that's like the time a lot of families are coming off of work and trying to go to the polls. So yes, I do think voter suppression efforts is one of the main aspects that is hurting voting turnout right now in Texas.
Kevin, you're running in House District 67, and that's Collin County, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so you're in North Texas too. If Democrats were to win the majority in the House this next session, would they be able to reverse some of these voting laws that have just passed that are making it harder to vote?
If Democrats win the majority this election cycle, absolutely, I believe that we will be able to. First, we'll have the numbers, and I think that we'll be able to go in and reverse some of this, the restrictive legislation that's made it harder and voting locations less accessible.
What issues do you think House Democrats should focus on this next session?
I think there's a lot to focus on. One of the first things that we need to look at is we need to truly winterize our energy grid. We shouldn't be happy when the temperature gets down to 20 degrees and the lights are still on. Republicans were doing backflips 2 weeks ago because that happened. Our energy grid needs to be equipped for extreme weather situations like happened last year. So we truly need to take a look and focus on maximizing and winterizing our energy grid. Women's reproductive health care rights are a huge issue. We need to repeal SB 8. Women need to be able to access any care that they need without any fear of right-wing vigilante justice persecuting them. And another thing that I think is very important is we need to improve our public school funding. We need to have the state kick in more to fund our schools. Our reliance on property taxes is just simply unsustainable. We need to protect our education dollars from bailing out the state's budget year in and year out. When we have a budget shortfall, education dollars are the first thing to fill that gap. And last, this is important for people all over the state, but especially in my district, we really need to focus on the expansion of rural broadband access.
Absolutely. And that's something that Republicans are not even talking about. And it's something that's so needed for a lot of our rural areas. Chuck, what are your thoughts on that? What do you think that the House Democrats should focus on this next session?
Getting voting safer and easier and more secure all across the state is a big thing. In Harris County, where I live, they have recently completed a massive upgrade, bought completely new machines so that we now have a real tangible paper ballot with an electronic copy that's stored in the ballot box, the machine on the ballot box. And I think that our elections here in Harris County are more safe than ever, but I have serious concerns about the equipment and age of the equipment in several of the other 253 counties that are in the state of Texas. Each county is allowed to do their own thing, and I think that I understand that they need the freedom to hold their own elections, but there should be minimum standards established, such as a real tangible paper ballot and other ballot security measures to improve elections all across the state. Instead of wasting time auditing things, let's make sure that we fix the problem up front and we don't have to spend millions or billions on a frivolous audit.
Exactly. And we had lots of people. I had a phone call yesterday. It made me feel so bad. A man called me and asked about voting in the Democratic election. And he said, am I going to be marked? Because I'm afraid someone will mess with my ballot. And that kind of fear atmosphere is what Texas has been putting out as far as people getting out of voting, that people are now afraid to go vote, that they're by declaring a party, by voting in a primary, that they're going to be somehow, their ballot's not going to count. And I think that phone call actually made me really sad. Chuck, you're in District 128, and you currently have a Republican Representative Briscoe Cain. Is that correct?
The worst legislator in the state of Texas, per Texas Monthly Magazine, nominated both in 2017 and 2021. The worst, the top of the list of the worst legislators in the entire state of Texas. 3 terms, and he's won it twice.
Wow.
It is absolutely time for a change.
How do people in your district react to his kind of extreme agenda and extreme antics? He's kind of like a Ted Cruz, a smaller Ted Cruz, like a representative Twitter troll.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, there seem to be some small core of people who love what he's doing because he's been reelected. He faced a Republican challenger in the primary in 2020 and beat him something like 2-1. I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but it was not a close race at all. And it was disappointing because that Republican was much more of a moderate. He was well known in the community. He's a former Baytown City Council member. Baytown's the core of HD 128. There are several other municipalities, but the bulk of the population lives in Baytown. So this dude was well known, reasonably well respected, and did not do well at all, despite Briscoe's inflammatory rhetoric from day one.
Unfortunately, I think a lot of that has to do with, especially on the Republican side, is low turnout in the primary, because the people that are on the extremes, they're going to come out and vote. So that's how we end up getting these kind of alt-right candidates in office, is in the primary, because of low turnout, unfortunately. And it isn't a secret that everyone in Texas can see that the GOP is moving further to the right. Last legislative session was possibly the most conservative session we've ever had, despite the state turning more blue. Just this week, we saw Greg Abbott targeting trans children and their parents. Kevin, what do you think is at stake for the average Texan during this next legislative session?
For the average Texan and for all Texans, I honestly think everything is at stake right now. Everything that Democrats have fought to protect for the last century. We're talking civil rights, voting rights, access to health care. Public schools are at risk at this point. If the Texas GOP has their way, we'd go into a voucher system that will destroy our public schools. We're truly on our way to an authoritarian, intolerant, and oppressive state government. I quite frankly say that we're already there. You look at Florida's Don't Say Gay bill that just passed in the State House. These are things that will be on the way in the next legislative session if we don't encourage voter turnout and if we don't start to find a way to make Texas blue.
Uduak, I have a question from the audience. Do you think campaign money can make a difference? I guess they're asking in campaigns, in Democratic campaigns.
I will say yes and no. Yes, in the terms of campaigns aren't cheap, as we know, like running ads, buying signs, hiring people who's willing to work for you and dedicate their time. But then again, I'll say no because of how social media is utilized right now. When we look at Gary Chambers, for example, the amount of money that it's kind of like a yes and a no. Like I said before, like he put out that ad on social media platform and gained so much money just from a social media platform ad as opposed to someone pushing ads, whether on TV, cable, or whatnot. So it does make your job easier, but if you don't have the money, it doesn't make it necessarily impossible.
And like I met you first on TikTok, which
Yeah.
I've noticed a lot of people running in Texas are using TikTok, which is a free platform, and you can end up getting thousands of people,
Yeah.
that, which is pretty awesome. Uduak, you're running on a progressive platform. Do you think the Democratic Party running more young progressive candidates would motivate more young people to get out and vote?
Yes, but unfortunately, what we are seeing in the Democratic Party right now is the complete opposite. I do think in order to obtain real change, we have to acknowledge the truth and hold everybody accountable. If we're being honest, from listening to like testimonies of people in my district in particular, they want more than a color. The concept of being blue is just not good enough for them. As we've seen time and time again, the concept like any old blue just won't do. People are tired, to say the least. They are in dying need of relentless leaders, those who are willing to fight even if the odds are against them. They don't want leaders who are so equipped with obtaining the approval of the GOP. They don't want leaders who are going to tap dance to the beat of the GOP. And they definitely do not want leaders who are going to continue to obtain funding from the GOP PACs. The only way, and I say this humbly because I know I am young and I'm still learning as I go, but the only way that I believe that true change can actually happen is if we utilize our blue seats to its max capacity by pushing progressive policies and pushing these policies unapologetically. There's no point in a seat being blue if they're just going to do the same thing the GOP is doing, just in a more secretive way. So yes, that is, I don't regret it. I continue on and we continue to push these progressive policies on our platform as well.
How are people reacting? Because you are, I don't know if you're the youngest person running. Are you? Do you know?
What in this Texas House seat, I believe I am, but I know a lot of people are running in Texas seats in general, like in the state of Texas.
Right. What is the reaction you're getting from older Democrats?
So it's kind of half and half, and this is what it's kind of like boggling, whatever the word is, because prior to me running, the Democratic Party always pushed the narrative of younger people need to get involved, younger people need to be more excited about the political process. But whenever I took the step to be the change I want to see, it's almost as if some people want to throw my age at me, saying, oh, you're too young, you're unqualified, equating my age to being unqualified. Meanwhile, the same people who are saying people like me are unqualified for a state position or a position in Texas leadership in general, their team, if you look at their team, their interns are my ages. The people who do the fact checks for them is my age. The people who are running the campaigns and organizing these campaigns, who are doing the dirty work behind their behind the campaign itself, they're my age. So at what point are you going to stop using someone's age as a way of saying they're unqualified? Because if we want younger people to get involved in this process, younger people want to make sure that they're being represented. Younger people want to see themselves in leadership. So I think it's very honestly detrimental. I don't think it's very smart of the Democratic Party to put that division in there. But I have come across a lot of people who are excited and who are happy to see such a new, vibrant, unapologetic voice taking that step.
I saw a tweet. I wish I could quote who it was from, but it said something like Democrats want young people to run for office until young people run for office. And I was like, that's so true.
That's so true.
Right. Because it's almost like they want that youth energy, and momentum, but they don't want to give up the control.
Exactly.
I think ideally, we would have a mix. Because younger people, older people are bringing experience, younger people are bringing something more to the table, and represent, people that feel like they haven't been represented by the older generations.
Exactly. And I wanted to say, because a lot of times they're going to try to throw someone's age as if they aren't experienced. Someone's reality, someone who is in student loan debt, someone who worked a 9 to 5, someone who is living off a minimum wage, that can be their experience, and that could be something they bring into representation.
Exactly. And then it is a different experience. I know my generation, just a couple above you, we had a totally different experience than even the people 10 years younger than me. We could buy a house. College was expensive, but it was nothing like it is now. So your generation is experiencing something different, and you need representatives that will speak to that.
I agree.
Chuck, going back to kind of the extremism we were talking about and Democratic messaging, what do you think is needed from the Democrats to convey the message of urgency about what could happen in Texas if the GOP keeps or gains in the House?
A couple of things. I would like to see better catchphrases. I have to hand it to the Republicans. They've done a really great job of having short, punchy phrases that catch and spread very quickly, and we need similar messaging. The messaging that we need to be carrying is we're teetering on the brink. I really, truly believe that we are in a situation very similar to the mid-1930s Germany, when an extreme right-wing faction that was small took a lot of power and ended up basically destroying Germany by getting them involved in wars and making tons of other horrible choices, and eventually the Holocaust. I hope that we obviously don't follow that same road, but we are on a very frighteningly, terrifyingly similar path. We are watching voting rights be rolled back. We are watching really serious voter suppression. We're watching women's health issues be highly politicized when it's just taking care of people's health, and it's terrifying. We need to develop better messaging to bring the reality of the situation better to the general public.
And Kevin, what are your thoughts on that?
I think Chuck's exactly right. I don't think it's hyperbole at all to point that out. Republicans haven't just, this thing with restricting and rolling back voting rights isn't new. It's something that's been happening for the last decade. It started with requiring voter ID, and then they started purging rolls, and then the progress that they make towards rolling back voting rights just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I don't think it's hyperbole to think that if things don't change, there could be property ownership requirements that happen in the next 5 years. Who knows where this is going to go? Will women still be able to vote? I don't think it's hyperbole at all to think these things, because that's the road that we're on. The Texas GOP is following the track of the Florida GOP, which is very extreme, and it should make people scared. I don't like to say that, but it's the honest to God truth.
What do you think is causing this? What do you think is behind it?
I think Republicans are terrified of losing their grip on control. And what they want to do right now is they want to change the rules. They want to change everything in our society to make it as easy as possible for them to remain in power, because they're terrified of the thought, if Texas goes blue, the nation goes blue. We're the last remaining barrier towards actually having a democracy that looks like us and that functions for us. And once that blue wave comes through here, it's game over for Republicans. So they are terrified, and they don't want to lose that grip on power that they have.
Yeah, so goes Texas, so goes the country. So that's what they say. So they're absolutely like fighting tooth and nail to keep it the way it is, because they know that they're losing the majority here. Like, it's coming. It's just a matter of time. You can look at the numbers and see that the Democratic gap is closing each election. So they just want to make it harder and harder. And I do think a lot of the laws that were passed to suppress the vote were aimed at Harris County.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, exactly. So because they did have such big voter turnout. So Chuck, are you like in the suburbs? Like, because I'm up here in North Texas, so I kind of thought that Harris County was all blue, but I guess not. If Briscoe Cain is your rep, which, like you say, he's like one of the worst of the worst, most extreme.
The best analogy that I think I could make, and I'm probably going to get some flack for this, is that Baytown is to Dallas. Baytown is to Houston as Plano is to Dallas. So
Okay.
it is a outlying. I mean, it's basically become a suburb, even though it was its own city 20, 30 years ago. But they've grown together. There's no border anymore. I mean, there's no gap between them really anymore, and it is a significantly redder version of the city. That's Baytown. There are absolutely thousands of Democrats here, and again, I hate what they've done, but I respect the efficiency with which they have accomplished isolating Democrats in the Baytown area and making us all feel like we are the only one. Every single one of us, I believe, feels like we are drowning in a sea of red, and it's not the case. We've just been shouted down and isolated and hit our light under a bushel, and it's time to come out and be proud Democrats. What I've been experiencing at the doors, I've been knocking doors for the past 2 weeks, and almost universally, the folks that I'm talking to are saying, "Oh my God, I am so glad that somebody is running against Briscoe. It is time for a change. We need a change." And they're embarrassed by his actions, but they really are not in communication with other Democratic organizations or other Democrats. And that's what I'm hoping to build over the course of my campaign.
How many voters do you have in your district?
Total voters is shame on me. I want to say 140,000
Okay.
registered voters, but turnout is typically closer to 50%.
Okay.
So, and there are more people than there are registered voters. So we've probably got 20 to 30,000 adults who are eligible to vote and are not registered to vote. So that's the other part of what I plan to accomplish over the summer, is getting 10,000 people registered to vote and hopefully finding out that they're mostly Democrats, because I really believe that that's the case. We've got apartment complexes here where of the residents that are there, 15% of those folks are registered to vote. Atrociously low. So we're going to be working those very, very hard over the year.
Joe in the one of the viewers commented voter apathy, which I think personally is a big problem. What are Uduak, what are your thoughts on voter apathy in Texas? How do we get people to really care enough to get out and vote?
I think, and I'm gonna be honest when I say this, I think within the Democratic Party, we focus more about what the GOP is doing rather than what we can do, because the voters, they already know, registered voters, they already know how bad the extremist GOP side is have been working, and they already know that. What they want from the Democratic Party is give me something worth voting for. I don't want to vote for you just because you're not them mentality. They want to see something worth voting for. They want to see the actions behind the words. They want to see the excitement back in the political process. Other than that, people are not going to feel the need to, why should I go out to vote if they're not given what they've been asking for? So I do think it's very important to emphasize, like how we stated before, that representation is equivalent to the people that's being represented, that our leaders are equivalent to the people that they're representing. So just being able just to give people something worth voting for is something that I would say.
Getting people that motivation, that somebody that's actually going to represent them.
Exactly.
And not just be part of the status quo.
Exactly.
Chuck and Kevin, both of y'all are in traditionally Republican districts, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so like where I live, I'm a Democratic county chair in Hood County, and we have a big issue here with Democrats who vote in the Republican primary because they want to vote in local races. Kevin, I'll start with you. Is that an issue where you're at?
I believe so. I've seen it in groups that I'm a part of, and different area clubs that think it's a good idea that if everybody goes out and votes for the Republican primary against a candidate that they don't like, then it would make it easier for us theoretically in November. And as much as I'd like to agree with that, I just don't think it's true, and I don't think there's a good reason. I don't think it's healthy to do that. What it does is it builds momentum for the Republican Party. They look at it and they think that they've got Democrats that are turning red, and they can take that and they can manipulate numbers. You can manipulate really anything if you put your mind to it. They can manipulate numbers and they can show voters. They can put charts and graphs out there. They can alter their messaging. Anything that they want to do to make it appear that Democrats are fleeing the Democratic Party and moving over to the red. So in theory, while it might be a good idea, I just can't agree with it.
Chuck, do you have that issue where you're at in Baytown?
I know for a fact that it happens. To what extent, I couldn't tell you. Texas is an open primary state, and people can hop back and forth as many times as they want, which makes it hard to discern which are the true Democrats and which are the folks that are trying to kick over the other team's sandcastle. I encourage folks not to do that. Vote in your primary to get our best candidates, because they'll do the same thing. They're going to try to vote against the best candidate in our primaries, and we need to just focus on getting our best candidates who can run and trounce whoever they put up. That's what I'm planning to do. I have spoken to a few folks who are talking about voting in the Republican primary, but I'm recommending them not do so. If for no other reason, then you are then exempted. You're not eligible to participate in the conventions. And I really want to get more folks involved in the conventions and getting involved in making the party the way they want to see it. We write the platform. We make the party. It's us. But you don't get the ticket if you vote in the Republican primary.
And also, it doesn't work. Like there's never been, even when they did like the block vote for education, which was a bipartisan kind of vote for no matter party to vote in the Republican primary to vote for pro-education. I don't know what their pro-education candidates, what their success rate was, but I know it didn't work. And that was hundreds of people joining in that effort. It's just never going to be enough people that you're going to have vote in the other primary to make that big a difference. And so you're really just kind of throwing your vote away. And like Kevin said, you're giving numbers to the Republican Party. And that does affect funding also. Yes, Chuck?
And it also gives credence to the absolute lunatics that are espousing some of these crazy views, because the folks that are hopping into the other primary are going to say, oh, we'll vote for this lunatic. He'll never win. And then he wins. I'm pretty sure that there was a significant portion of that in 2016. Everybody thought Donald Trump was a freaking joke. He has always just reeked of corruption and vice and criminality. And I was astounded when he won the primary. And of course, heartbroken when he won the general. But I think that it started, the little tiny snowball began in several of the primaries where people thought, hey, let's vote for the clown who could never possibly win to wreck their chances of putting up a good candidate. And we got a clown.
Exactly. If anybody thinks that voting doesn't matter, all they have to do is look to Donald Trump. Because that was something I was like you. I thought, this will never happen. Like I went into election night just so excited for Hillary's win, and I'll never feel the same about elections ever again. Like I just trusting that the right thing will happen. Kevin, did you have something to add?
I was just going to mention, to Chuck's point, as far as voting in the Republican primaries, one thing, and people may not want to hear it, it could just be something on our side, but it truly does make it a lot harder for candidates to go with their outreach programs because it obscures the true numbers of who we're reaching out to. So when we want to try to do targeted outreach programs, it really does make it a hard, it's just much more of an uphill climb for those things.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And that's something I don't think that the average voter thinks about when candidates are running. And we're not talking about, Beto, we're talking about somebody that may be running for a local commissioner seat. One of the most important things that possibly the most important thing is data. And when we say data, that's voters' information. How the parties get that is in the primaries. Voting in the primaries is the only thing that can tell the Democratic Party that this person living at this address is a Democrat. Otherwise, we just don't know. So those candidates, local candidates that want to go door knock, that have small budgets, are not able to find you if you do not vote in your party's primary.
That's true.
Right. So let's go on to our next point, talking about Texas possibly going blue, hopefully going blue. We all know that Texas would be better off economically, health-wise, with the environment, with Democratic policies, but most Republicans and even a lot of independents are not hearing that message. Chuck, I'll go to you first. What do you think Democrats have to do to convince people who are more centrist that Democratic policies would be better for them?
It gets back to the messaging. We need to be able to deliver punchy messages, and it's difficult because the things that we're trying to explain don't always easily fit into nice little packages. It's hard to explain, not impossible, but hard to explain how we want to improve education, how we want to make sure that college students aren't graduating with six-figure debt that's going to follow them to their graves. That's a terrible situation to be in, and I feel horribly for the folks that are dealing with that. But we need to develop messaging along the fact that we can provide this. We had it in the past. College didn't used to cost this much, and there's no reason that it costs as much as it does today other than Republican tax programs.
Mm-hmm.
They have intentionally made education expensive so that they can chain students to debt for the rest of their lives to make money for their investors, donors.
Right.
Really investors.
Right. Uduak?
I was gonna say, I agree basically with what he was saying, but a key thing that people aren't realizing is Texas is already statistically, we're already a blue state. The problem is not at this point, not even turning people's voters, because if our main issue right now and our main focus should be getting people out to vote, because if you look at the numbers, we've already surpassed registered Republican voters in the state of Texas. It's just more so, like he said earlier, our messaging. It's about putting our actions with our words. It's about giving them examples of what we have done to pretty much earn their vote. I think that's a main thing that we're struggling with within the Democratic Party. As I stated before, it's just that we have to put people in front of their faces that they deem worthy of voting for, that they have excitement to go out and practice their right to vote.
And Kevin?
Absolutely. We are already a blue state. We have an uphill climb with the way that they're changing the rules and redistricting. My district voted for Biden by 9%, and now it's a 9% in favor of Trump, the way that it was redistricting. And I think I saw in one of the comments, the key to all this election, the key to everybody's race is embracing our rural areas, because I truly think the rural areas represent a lot of the marginalized, underappreciated, and overlooked communities. They're the people that are out there that maybe Republicans and Democrats haven't focused on because they think rural areas they're a given. So in my district, for example, I've got areas like Blue Ridge and Farmersville, Anna and Melissa. They're not as densely populated. A lot of them are rural areas that are used to being in a red wash as far as the election goes. Now we've got these voters that are in winnable races, and we can encourage them and let them know for one time their vote truly does matter. So I think it's a matter of truly embracing the rural areas and finding a way to get out the vote in those areas.
Can I say something?
Sure. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I completely actually agree with Kevin, because even when you look at presidential elections, you'll see San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, like the major cities are blue. But what we don't focus on is the, like he said, rural areas that are red, and it adds up. And I think the GOP knows that, and they know that they've been one thing about the GOP, they're very, very smart. I give them that. And they strategically strategize around that. They know that we can't get the major cities, but what we are going to do, we're going to get Lubbock, we're going to get this county, and it adds up, and it makes the state come out as red. And so I actually do agree with Kevin. I think we actually do need to prioritize and make sure we're pushing forth supporting Democratic nominees in those areas as well.
Exactly. And that's with Beto coming so close, like that's what he lost. He lost the rural areas. He went up, but not enough. And me living in a very red area, kind of our saying is we just want to lose by less. So if we can move up each election and gain ground, we can help the Democrats all over the state. Even if we're not able to get people elected locally. My county is like 80% red. So, but we do have a group of Democrats here that show up every election and that really care. So that's what I think that's really important too. And we're in a rural area, but we don't see a lot of, I don't know how to say this. We don't see a lot of investment in the rural areas from the state party, really. Because they're more focused on the bigger blue areas, which I understand. But unless we gain ground and lose by less in the rural areas, we'll continue to lose statewide. Unfortunately, it needs to be kind of a combination approach of investing in the urban areas, but also investing some in the rural areas.
It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for the state party to continue focusing on the voter base that we know is consistently going. We know that they're coming out to vote blue. We need to turn our attention to the ones that we're a little bit more unsure about. And that's not to say that we leave alone and we forget about our base, because absolutely not. They need to be prioritized and catered to as well, but we really do need to turn our attention to the people that think their voice doesn't matter.
Exactly. Uduak, what do you think Democrats can do to get more of their messaging out, especially about the dangers of what's happening in the state with its move towards extremism?
Give me 1 sec. Say that one more time.
So can you hear me?
Yeah, you said, say that one more time.
With Democrats, their messaging, how do we message the dangers of what's coming with the GOP's lean towards, especially Republican representatives leaning into extremism?
Okay. In my honest opinion, I think the message is already clear. I think people already know how damaging and how dangerous like Republican extremism can be. I think the Democratic Party has done a good job delivering that message 100%. I think the issue, like I said before, is that our party's refusal of providing the people more than just we aren't them mentality. I said it before, like, I understand it's like hard to hear, but then again, I think that we have to be honest with ourselves. We need to do more when it comes to delivering, as far as putting action behind the messaging. If you ask a lot of registered Democratic voters in this state, they'll tell you like straight up, they do not support the GOP. But in the same sentence, like for me personally, while we're going door to door and speaking to these people, they're also expressing to us like how Democrats are not giving them anything to come out for. So it is sad to hear, but it's the truth. And we do need to do more. We have to stop playing politics like it's a game, because at the end of the day, people's lives are being affected. So we're so caught up in expressing how bad the GOP is, but we're not really prioritizing what we are actually going to do. And it's turning people off and it's turning people away.
Kevin?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry. How do Democrats motivate non-voters to get out and vote, especially in the primary? So far, turnout in Texas has been pretty low.
It's a challenge, but we have to encourage people that their vote is their voice. We have to make it clear to people that we need to hear everyone's voice in order to be truly represented. I want to see communities where you can have people that look like you as your state representative. HD 67 is an incredibly diverse area. There's a population of around 300,000 people just in Plano, and of that, around 80,000, I believe, and don't quote me on the numbers or anything like that, but there's a very high Indian and Pakistani population here. The way that the redistricting erased the population growth from those communities is absolutely ridiculous to me, because I believe 95% of our population growth over the last decade has come from minority communities, and we're putting it in a situation where by redrawing the lines constantly, we're not electing people that are giving us that population growth. So it starts with people. It starts with conversations. We need to have conversations with our neighbors.
Exactly.
I did this as a precinct chair and as a volunteer. What's truly important to you? What are the issues that you want to see addressed by your next representative? This has to be a truly grassroots effort, because we're not going to get anywhere by just pretending the Texas Democratic Party has the right messaging. We have to frame our narrative, and we have to frame our own messaging. We have to reach out to every single voter to find out what's important to them, to remind them that they are not overlooked anymore, that they are going to be represented by the people that are talking to them. It's a tremendous outreach program that we have in front of us, but that is, to me, that's the way to embrace the rural areas I talked about earlier. We need to get in front of them. We need to talk to them. We need to find out what's important to them.
Exactly.
Absolutely. We have a little bit extra time. Y'all, I don't have any. Usually every week we get a big talker that likes to talk the whole time and fills up. But all of y'all have been very polite, taking turns. So I'll just ask you each just a little question about yourself. Chuck, this is your first time running, correct? What made you want to run?
Mostly that I absolutely could not watch Briscoe just walk back into office. He must face an opposition, and I was in communication with the Harris County Democratic Party basically from the time filing opened until the last week of filing. And has anybody filed? Has anybody filed? And no one did. We tried to encourage a couple of local well-known folks in the community, and they didn't have the appetite for it. And I had the time and ability, and I said, all right, I'm going to do it. So I'm running. I guess my first campaign was in 2020 when I wanted to become a delegate to the DNC. So I represented Bernie from SD4 here in Harris County, and I spent hours on the phone calling the other Bernie state delegates saying, hey, I want you to vote for me. And it was my first experience campaigning for myself and selling myself. And it was heartwarming to find out that there are other people there, because like I said earlier, they have done a really good job of making a lot of us feel like we're completely alone. And so getting in communication with folks has been a truly eye-opening experience, because I'm seeing that that we're everywhere. There are Democrats all over the place in places you wouldn't expect. And it is time for us to stand up, show ourselves, and proudly be Democratic. I intend to make being a Democrat a cool thing again, and not something that people talk about in hushed tones because they don't want somebody at IHOP to overhear them or something like that. We need to inspire folks. What Beto's done since 2018 has been impressive, and I would love to continue that kind of work on a local scale here in Baytown.
Awesome. Yeah, I think so too. I think Beto made a big difference, especially like in my county, with people just saying that they're Democrat. Suddenly they had someone that they would risk putting out a sign for.
Yep.
So I'm hoping with his governor run that we'll kind of build on that momentum. Uduak, I don't know, is this your first campaign? Have you run for anything else before?
No, this is my first campaign running. Basically, whenever I decided to run, I'm 23 now, but I filed when I was 22. It was basically me just wanting to be the change that I wanted to see. I like many others, I was just sick and tired of being sick and tired. On both ends, I will say it was just like, at some point, we need somebody who's going to be unapologetically them and relentless and be put in a position of leadership to where no matter what's thrown their way, they're not going to fold. So whenever I decided to run, I knew it wasn't going to be easy, 100%. I've learned a lot these past 8+ months of running. I've been shaped to be even stronger than when I walked in. I can see why a lot of I don't want to say in a negative way. It's negative and positive because I can see why a lot of younger people wouldn't want to run for a public position, but also I want younger people to see my race, and I want to create a safe space and break barriers for younger people to be able to run comfortably into representing. But yeah, it's been up and down, but I'm really, really happy of what me and my team has done this last 8+ months. With election coming up, we're still fighting, and we're going to continue to hang in there until results come out.
And I think it's really inspiring for you to run. I think that, it's intimidating to be, especially a woman and a young woman stepping into politics where you feel like everyone is older and more experienced than you. And once you get into it, you learn a lot of them are not. A lot of them don't know any more than you know. And, they're just the people that have shown up. And that's why it's so important for, regular people to show up and give other people a voice. Kevin, is this your first time running or have you run before?
This is my first time running. Wow. Actually, I've been listening to Chuck's story and how his district sounds, and it's really interesting. Our districts are so similar, and our stories are very similar as well. Matter of fact, Chuck, I'm running against Jeff Leach, Briscoe Kane's partner in crime. So we got a lot in common. This is the first race, and matter of fact, when it came down to it, I was eyeing a run in 2024, and 6 days before the filing deadline, I got a call letting me know that there wasn't anybody in this district that had stepped up. Collin County has one other district that doesn't have a Democrat running, and I wasn't about to let that happen to a second district, especially against somebody who can bring in and has brought in as much fundraising money as Jeff Leach. If HD 67 doesn't have somebody running in this race, Jeff Leach is cutting checks to other Republicans just left and right, and I couldn't allow that. But I really, truly, I want to reach out, and I want to be able to be that voice that people, be that change that we want to see, be the voice for people that I can see that are overlooked, and as I've said before, underappreciated, marginalized communities. I can't imagine what it's like to live in a situation where I can, I'm living paycheck to paycheck, and thinking that there's nobody that is going to go to bat for me. And one of the parts of my campaign that I'm really going to focus on is I'm going to be out there every day letting these people know that I'm here to fight day in and day out for them, to make sure that their voice is heard, that we've had enough, and that it is truly time for a change for politics as usual in the Texas GOP that we've gotten used to.
Absolutely. Uduak?
And I was going to add, because after he mentioned the paycheck to paycheck, it had me to thinking, because when you look at public seating and running for public office, it already marginalizes a certain demographic and certain groups of certain types of people running, because running a campaign is a full-time job. You have to realize there are people who still have to pay their bills. There are people who have kids. There are people who are teachers. There are people who have to still prioritize their personal life while wanting to be a public representative. So I think it's very important that we do even touch space, or just to even talk about how public representation already marginalizes like specific people, because as you see, there's a lot of people who are lawyers who are representing. There are people who come from wealthy families and money already, so it's easy for them to take that step in, while people like us, everyday average people who are just trying to get by and still be the voice in our communities, are still struggling as well.
Absolutely. I think all three of y'all are really inspiring examples of people who stepped up. Chuck?
And that is by design.
Right.
The increased tax cuts for the rich and increased burdens on the lower economic classes is by design, so that we have fewer tools to fight back. We're getting really close to, if we don't start gaining some ground, it's over.
Mm-hmm.
And we have really got to turn out strongly in the midterms and in 24 while we still can.
Yeah.
Kevin, you had something to add?
Oh yeah, just to add to that, it really is going to come down to strategizing. I know this was mentioned in national circles when it became evident that we weren't going to be able to get enough support to, at a federal level, give us the constitutional protections for voting rights that we need. And Joe Biden said, well, we're just going to have to strategize a little bit better. And unfortunately, that's where we're at. That's what we have to do. We have to have a strong ground game, and we have to have a great strategy.
Yeah.
And Chuck, did you have something to add?
Just pointing out my fully restore the 1965 Voting Rights Act. They've been chipping away at voting rights. I have been telling folks, and I really truly believe it, voting for Republicans is voting against voting. They do not want anybody but them to vote, because they want control.
They have this picture of what America looks like. But the problem is with the GOP is that their picture of what America looks like is very exclusive, and it only equates for a very, very small percent of what is truly represented in this nation. And as long as they continue to, without as long as they remain unchecked, they're going to make life and manipulate laws and votes and everything as easy for as much as possible for that small sliver that falls into that American dream that they perceive. The rest of us out here in real life and real America, we have to work hard.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now we are running to the end of our time. I want to thank y'all so much for being here. Thank y'all so much for stepping up and running. You're what makes this primary season worth it, supporting local candidates that have stepped up to the challenge. Before we wrap up, I want to give you each a moment to tell everybody how they can find out more about you and your campaigns. Uduak, we'll start with you.
So you can go to uduakfortexas.com, which is UDUAKFORTX.com. You can follow me on all social media platforms at Uduak for Texas as well. And that's the best way to reach us.
Awesome. Kevin?
My website is www.kevinmorrisforchange.com. There is a link in there for volunteers. We're assembling an army of volunteers for once these primaries are over and we can really hit the ground. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, Kevin Morris for HD67.
And Chuck?
I'm on socials with Crews, CREWS, 4FORTX, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. My website is still in development because my company that is building it for me, their leader is also running for House up in Dallas area, Kendall Scudder's Armadillo Strategies. And so I have been patient with them. I'm unopposed in the primary. It's not critical, but it will be up and running hopefully by the end of March.
But people can find you on social media in the meantime, right?
CREWS, not like Ted.
I was going to say, you're not the other cruise. You're the other
good
cruise.
one.
The good cruise. Again, I'm Adrienne Quinn Martin. Thank you all for being here. Today is our last show before the primary. We're going to take some time off and we'll probably be back in a few weeks. Today is the last day for early voting. So everybody get out and vote. Election day is Tuesday. We really need a big turnout for Democrats in Texas. Show people that we're here. Thanks again, everybody, for watching, and thanks for being here. Thanks for watching Blue Talk Texas.
Thank you for having us.